It was a night that started like any other, but what unfolded would change everything. A young black boy, barely 16, found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. On a quiet street corner, a routine interaction with the police quickly spiraled out of control. In a matter of moments, the situation escalated into something much darker. Officers pushing the boy to the ground, throwing punches without warning, leaving him bloodied and helpless. But what happened next was something no one expected. From out of nowhere, a familiar face appeared. Mike Tyson, the boxing legend, known for his ferocity in the ring. With no hesitation, he rushed toward the scene, pushing through the crowd of onlookers, his presence commanding attention. Tyson, with his calm but powerful aura, confronted the officers, demanding they stop the brutal attack. The scene was chaotic, the air thick with tension. Was Tyson truly going to stand up to the police in such a dangerous moment? What could he do against authority in front of a crowd, with cameras rolling? The pressure was on, and for the young boy, the next few moments would determine everything. But did Tyson's intervention have the power to change the outcome, or would it only make things worse? The story is far from over. The young boy Marcus had never imagined his night would end like this. He was just walking home from a late-night shift at a local diner when he was stopped by two officers on a routine patrol. At first, it seemed like any ordinary exchange. He wasn't doing anything wrong. But the moment the officers began questioning him with a growing edge in their voices, Marcus felt something wasn't right. The tension was palpable, like something dangerous was just beneath the surface. It was a feeling he knew all too well, a feeling many black kids know. The fear of being judged by the color of your skin, even when you're just trying to get home. As the officers' voices raised, so did their hands. What started as a few sharp words quickly turned into force. They shoved him against a nearby wall, their hands rough and unforgiving. Marcus didn't resist, but that didn't matter. The punches came without warning, and in a matter of seconds, he was on the ground, struggling to breathe, his vision blurred with pain and fear. And then, just as things seemed to reach their breaking point, a voice cut through the chaos. Stop. It was a roar, the kind of roar you'd expect from someone who'd been through their own battles. It was Mike Tyson, stepping into the night with the determination of a man who had fought for his life more times than he could count. But could even Tyson's power stop the brutality that was unfolding? The officers froze for a moment when they saw Mike Tyson's face in the crowd. They hadn't expected anyone to intervene, let alone a figure of his stature. The street fell deathly silent, save for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing. It wasn't just the power in Tyson's voice that made the officers hesitate, it was his presence. Tyson wasn't just any man. He was a symbol, someone who had fought through his own battles and emerged stronger each time. But in that moment, his fame wasn't the only thing that mattered. It was the weight of everything he stood for. Marcus, barely conscious, could hear the murmurs around him. Some of the onlookers seemed unsure, glancing nervously between Tyson and the officers. It wasn't lost on them that this wasn't just about one boy. This was about a system, a history of abuse and distrust that ran deep. There were people in that crowd who had witnessed too many moments like this, times when the police crossed a line and no one stood up. Others feared the consequences of speaking out, knowing too well how quickly the system could turn on those who challenged it. As Tyson stood firm, his eyes locked with the officers. "I'm telling you to stop," he said again, his voice low but unyielding. One officer, a man in his 30s, clenched his fists, clearly torn. He had seen the footage of police brutality on the news. He'd been part of protests even. But now, in front of one of the most famous athletes in the world, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on him. Tyson's gaze never wavered. He wasn't just fighting for Marcus, he was fighting for something bigger. But as the seconds ticked by, tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Would the officers listen, or would the situation escalate even further? The onlookers, including some who had started recording on their phones, knew this moment was about more than just the fight between a boy and the law. It was about whether or not anyone would stand up when it truly mattered. Marcus's life was in the balance, but so was the idea of justice itself. And for Tyson, a man who had spent his life overcoming obstacles, this was a fight he couldn't back down from. The question remained, who would win in a world where justice was so often out of reach, and would Tyson be able to change the outcome, or would his intervention make things worse? The air was thick with tension, and the stares from the crowd seemed to weigh on everyone. Mike Tyson stood tall, but even he could feel the pressure mounting. The officers were still poised, unsure of how to react. They could hear the whispers of people recording, the unmistakable click of cameras capturing every second. The power of the moment wasn't lost on them. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about how the world would see this, how their actions would be judged by millions. Tyson's gaze never left the officers, but inside, his mind raced. He knew what was at stake, but he also understood how quickly things could spiral out of control. The streets were already volatile, tensions between communities and the police simmering under the surface for years. Any wrong move could ignite a fire that couldn't be put out. One officer, the younger one, shifted his weight nervously, his hand hovering near his holster. Tyson noticed it instantly. His muscles tensed, ready to move if necessary, but he knew he couldn't afford to make the first aggressive move. Not in front of so many eyes, not with the whole world watching. "Listen to me," Tyson said, his voice dropping lower, yet every syllable cutting through the chaos. "I don't want this to end in bloodshed. You don't want that either. Walk away now, and no one gets hurt." The words echoed in the silent night, and for a moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped. The officers stood frozen, each man lost in his own thoughts, processing the weight of Tyson's words. The crowd, too, held its breath, waiting for something, anything to break the deadlock. Then suddenly, a shout pierced the silence. A voice from the back of the crowd, one that had been growing louder for a while. "You're gonna let him walk?" The shout came from a man, older, his face twisted with frustration. "That boy didn't do anything. This is the same crap we see every day. You think the world's gonna forget about this because Mike Tyson's here?" The officer who had been struggling with his decision snapped his head toward the man, anger flashing across his face. "Stay out of this," he barked. But the crowd was already reacting. The murmurs turned into raised voices, and more people began to shout in support of Marcus. The tension skyrocketed, with every second feeling like it could explode. And then, in a moment of horrifying clarity, it seemed the officers had made up their minds. One of them moved forward, hands still gripping his baton, his jaw clenched, as if he had reached the end of his patience. Tyson's heart hammered in his chest. Was this it? Was this how it all would end? Another night, another injustice, another life at risk. In that instant, Tyson stepped forward, his presence a wall of muscle and power. "I told you," he said, his voice low, but shaking with intensity, "you don't want to do this." The officers hesitated. The world held its breath. Everything was about to change. But how? Just as the officer's hand hovered over his baton, something unexpected happened. A screech of tires tore through the night, cutting the tension like a knife. The sound was so abrupt, so jarring, that it stopped everyone in their tracks. A black SUV slid to a stop on the curb, its headlights blinding for a moment before the engine died. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, a door swung open, and out stepped a man in a dark suit. His presence was commanding, but his face was unfamiliar. The crowd, already on edge, murmured in confusion as he strode toward the officers with an air of authority. The stranger, calm and composed, reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. Not a regular police badge, but one that looked different, more official, like it belonged to a high-ranking officer. His every move was measured, deliberate, and his gaze swept over the scene with an intensity that could freeze blood. "I'm Special Agent Donovan," the man announced, his voice sharp and clear, cutting through the chaos. He flashed the badge in front of the officers. "Step away from the boy, now." The officers, who had been on the verge of escalating the situation, froze. There was no sign of recognition in their eyes, but there was a clear hesitation. The younger officer looked back at Tyson, then at Agent Donovan. The power dynamic had shifted once again, but this time, it wasn't just about the police or the crowd, it was about something much deeper. "Agent Donovan," one of the officers finally stammered, glancing at his partner, unsure of what was happening. What is this?" Donovan's eyes locked onto the officer's, his expression cold and unreadable. "This doesn't concern you," he said, before turning his attention to Marcus, who was still on the ground, bloodied but conscious. His voice softened, but only slightly. "Get up, son. You're coming with me." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Marcus, still dazed, couldn't process what was happening. He barely registered Tyson's presence beside him, the boxer's towering figure offering some semblance of protection. But in that moment, Marcus felt a new wave of fear. Who was this man? What did he want with him? And why had he shown up so suddenly? The crowd, which had already been teetering on the edge of chaos, now murmured in confusion. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. Was Donovan here to help, or was he part of something even darker? Could Tyson fight against a force he didn't even understand? And more importantly, what did this mean for Marcus? Tyson's fists clenched, his instincts kicking in. "What do you want with him?" he demanded, stepping closer, trying to read the man in the suit. Donovan's eyes flashed momentarily, then softened, just enough to show a flicker of something that could have been sympathy or maybe regret. But whatever it was, it didn't last. "That's none of your concern, Mr. Tyson," he said, his voice carrying an unmistakable finality. The crowd fell silent again, but the silence now felt ominous. Every person standing there knew that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. The moment of truth was closing in. Would Tyson be able to protect Marcus from the dark forces now surrounding them? Or would Marcus be caught in a web much larger than he could have ever imagined? The answers were just out of reach, and with every second, the stakes grew higher. Tyson's body tensed as Agent Donovan stepped closer to Marcus, his hand outstretched like a predator reaching for prey. The crowd was silent now, every person hanging on to the smallest movement, the smallest word. Tyson wasn't sure what Donovan wanted, but he was certain it wasn't good. The weight of the situation hit him harder than anything he'd ever faced in the ring. This wasn't a fight he could win with fists alone. It was bigger than that. "Stay back," Donovan warned, his voice low and firm. But Tyson didn't move. He couldn't. Not with Marcus still kneeling on the cold pavement, blood streaked across his face, fear still evident in his wide eyes. "You said it's none of my business," Tyson said, his voice cutting through the tension. "But it's my business now. You can't just take him." Donovan's eyes narrowed. For a moment, there was no response, just the steady, heavy silence of the night pressing in on them. Then, Donovan's lips twitched into a smile that was anything but reassuring. "You're right about one thing," he said. "This is your business now." And just like that, everything changed. Donovan stepped back, gesturing with a sharp flick of his hand, and another man, dressed similarly, emerged from the shadows, holding a tablet. The second agent approached Marcus, but as he neared, his fingers trembling, he stopped short. "Wait," the man said, his voice wavering with an odd mix of relief and confusion. He looked at Donovan, his face pale. "This is not the right person." Marcus blinked, not understanding what was happening, but the sudden shift in the agent's demeanor was impossible to ignore. Donovan, who had been so sure moments ago, now appeared uncertain. The crowd murmured again, a low ripple of voices growing louder with confusion. Donovan's hand dropped to his side. The confident, authoritative figure had disappeared, replaced by someone who looked distraught. "No," Donovan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "This isn't possible." The second agent, still holding the tablet, looked at Marcus, then back to Donovan, his confusion palpable. This was supposed to be someone else, a different boy. The truth hung in the air, and Tyson's heart skipped a beat as the pieces began to fall into place. Donovan wasn't here to take Marcus to safety. He was here to make a mistake, one that could cost both men everything. "What do you mean, a different boy?" Tyson's voice was sharp now, demanding answers. Donovan exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face as if the weight of what had just unfolded was too much to process. He turned to the crowd, eyes flashing with a quiet desperation. "You think this is about just one kid? About saving one life? It's bigger than that. We've been tracking the wrong boy this whole time." It was as if the ground shifted beneath their feet. The entire scenario was a setup, a wild twist that nobody had seen coming. Marcus wasn't the target. There was another child, someone in danger, someone else's life hanging in the balance, and the agents had made a critical error in their operation. The air grew thick with confusion, fear, and uncertainty. The crowd's whispers grew louder, some people calling for the truth, others unsure of what was happening. Tyson stood there, realizing that the real danger was still out there. The true target, the one they were really after, was somewhere else, lost in the chaos. Before Tyson could ask more questions, the second agent stepped forward again, looking at Marcus with an expression of apology. "Kid, you've got no idea what's going on here. This wasn't supposed to happen." Marcus, still dazed, finally pushed himself to his feet. He didn't know who to trust anymore, but one thing was clear: the night wasn't over. Donovan had been wrong. The boy they were supposed to find, he was still out there, and the real story was far from over. Tyson clenched his fists. The fight hadn't ended. It had only just begun. The confusion in the air was palpable as Marcus stood there, trying to process the chaos around him. Tyson, still tense, took a step closer, his presence offering some kind of grounding. The crowd, once filled with anger and fear, began to settle into a stunned silence. It wasn't just about one boy anymore, it was about an entire system unraveling before their eyes. Agent Donovan looked defeated now, his eyes shadowed with the weight of the truth he'd just uncovered. "We've been hunting the wrong person," he said, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "We were after a child who'd been moved, relocated, and you," he gestured to Marcus, "were never supposed to be part of this." Tyson kept his eyes on the agent, the frustration boiling inside him, but also a dawning understanding. This wasn't just a case of police brutality or corruption. There was a bigger picture at play, one involving shadowy government operations, children caught in the crossfire, and far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. With a quiet sigh, Tyson turned to Marcus. "You're free now," he said, his voice softer than before, "but this fight is far from over." Marcus nodded slowly, still trying to grasp the weight of the night's events. As the crowd began to disperse, the hum of reality settled in. Tyson had intervened when it mattered most, but the bigger fight, against systems of injustice, against unseen forces, was still out there. The truth was messy, complicated, and incomplete, but it had been revealed, and that was a start. And for Marcus, it was a second chance, something worth fighting for.